Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. Your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. To easily describe today's guest, I think would be somewhat of an impossibility. If I wanted to simplify it, I would be trying to simplify complexity and I wouldn't do it justice. David Homan began his career as a classical pianist and composer and evolved that from what we could hear to things we really couldn't hear or see, in connecting people that should know each other all along, but in a very specific way. He's the author of Orchestrating Connection, a book recently released with his co-author Noah Askin, is launching a tech company called SOAR, which he'll discuss. And David, I've really been looking forward to having you on the podcast. I have so many questions to start with. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. Let's just hope I have enough answers.
All right, let's go back. When and how did you initially move into music, especially into musical composition?
So I started banging on pots when I was 4. My late father was a amateur jazz pianist. His father, although he was an electrician, was a big band musician, tenor saxophonist in Philly in the 30s and 40s. So music was always part of my family. My dad was also an acclaimed Shakespearean scholar, theater director. So I grew up acting. I grew up playing music as if this was normal. I was parented with Elizabethan English and Shakespeare, even more than anything else. And I learned by ear, my younger brother as well. And by the time I was 12, I was really, really sick of piano. I also got sick that year. We called this the year that I died. It was one of those pivotal catalyst moments in your life. You don't realize how important it is until you're looking back, way back in this case. But I stopped playing because I played for Elise. My brother played for Elise. I played a Chopin etude. My brother played the Chopin etude. I was getting a headache almost from all of this. So I stopped. And then Nirvana came. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Under the Bridge, from the Chili Peppers, so many of like the formations of what was grunge rock, alt rock, and the rest. And I asked my teacher if I could learn those pieces. And being a beautiful man who was also a bluegrass player, not just a straight classical teacher, he said, great. I learned Smells Like Teen Spirit. A 6-minute piece became 20 minutes. I learned Mason Williams' Classical Gas, the old 60s protest song, because I heard it in a Simpsons episode that came out. And suddenly I had my own version, and my teacher, David Cook, said, you're improvising, but you're actually writing your own. Want to keep doing it? And I just started making up my own work, all by memory. I didn't know how to notate. There was a time where I had, with a 8-track or my memory, about 50 different piano pieces I've written. And by the time I got through high school and thought maybe I could compose in college, I couldn't really notate. I learned by ear, but I was regularly writing music for plays in particular.
So as you were writing or imagining what those sounds would be, what were you seeing?
So I only see, like I will hear a melody, but I'm literally visualizing as I compose. I'm not an auditory creative. And there's really, in my mind, there's 2 different types. You're a blend of something who either responds to something you're hearing or responds to something you're seeing. It's rare with music that you respond to something you're smelling or touching, but really sight and sound are those 2 mediums. So I will respond based on something that's in my head that I'm telling a narrative or a story. So when I was a slightly overweight high school kid trying to talk to girls but not knowing how, I wrote a lot of like forlorn love songs that I wish I could play
Okay.
for people, but I was too nervous to play. But as I kept composing, I kept needing a reason, which is why I gravitated to dance, to theater,
Hmm.
responding to poetry. And I would take something, a heavy work like King Lear, which I did with my father, and I would write 90 minutes worth of music, all inspired by the play, which we then did live, me as the pianist with several musicians, between my freshman and sophomore year of college.
Do you index memories by music? Like you hear something and you say, I remember where I was the last time I heard this?
I actually have a pretty bad musical memory, besides the stuff I have to write on my own. You ask me to identify who a band is or what a piece of music is, and I have a master's in music and I'm an award-winning composer. Like, I'll be able to tell you the composer. That's about all. I have one thing I have a real index memory on. It's people. It's why my world is now relationships. It's the thing I think all my performing arts training led me to, was that ability to remember the resonance of people, what they're after, and who they are, and then pattern match that, which is why the world I've now built, called Orchestrated Connecting, came about from all that early world of what I thought was fun, maybe career driven
Hmm.
uh, training. That, I do have a career as a composer. I just had a retrospective of some of my ballet works down in Vero Beach, Florida. But that wasn't my full calling. It was just part of it.
So I have one kind of adjacent question on composition. I'd mentioned to you before that living in Vail, Colorado, we have a wonderful music scene here all summer. And I'm always fascinated if the New York Philharmonic's here or the Philadelphia Philharmonic, they may have a guest composer. And I'm always looking at the, you know, 80 to 200 people in the orchestra who know their parts cold. Are they waiting for a cue from the conductor to come in? If the conductor is giving a signal to, lift it up and lift it down, what's actually going on up there? Well, I guess would be
Yeah.
my question.
All right. So when you're a musician at the level of the Philharmonic or in New York or Philadelphia's orchestra, you could play your part down packed instantly. You don't need the help to play your part or to do your cues. So for somebody who's not a musician, right? So think about if there's a 100-meter dash at the Olympics and there was somebody whose hand gestures wasn't the start of the gun to run, but they could get every single one of those 8 runners in a line to step at the exact same time. What a conductor can do is get all those musicians who are ready to come in not just at the right moment, but into that right moment with the energy they're
I
conveying from
see.
everything else that
Okay.
those individual musicians
Interesting.
might be trained to hear, but the conductor is trained to hear how the sections work together.
Mm.
Into like the geeky part of it, like a string section entering, you have to have a certain velocity of your bow for a certain speed, timbre, tempo, all of this. And to understand how that lands at a massive work like a Prokofiev or a Shostakovich or a Brahms, the conductor is the only one who can take that energy and have it be in sync
Mm.
amongst 30 to 40 different people who could all do it on their own great, and they're all trained to play it together perfectly. But an audience can tell when it's a Gustavo Dudamel who makes the energy of something sound like it's the first time it's ever been played, compared to a conductor who is much more technically great, but doesn't create that emotional energy that a
Interesting.
great conductor can really convey.
I want to stay on music for just a bit because I've always loved, and I don't care what the style of music is. If it's well crafted and well executed, I'm going to listen to it. Um, when you ask any other band but this one what they think the best album of all time is, Pet Sounds keeps coming up. And I've
Hmm.
looked at some of the videos of Brian Wilson, who given the fact that he's different, probably on the spectrum somewhere, I watched when some of their early recordings where they would just sound perfect. He would say, "Nope, no good, not enough energy, no good, we're doing it again." And he had a bunch of session musicians in there, and you could see that and Brian was on a lot of the records, but you could see that, his cousin and like Love and Al Jardine, all the rest of them are like, okay, we're going again because Brian says we're going again. What was he hearing and seeing that everybody else couldn't see? What was his particular genius to create what he created?
So obviously, I wasn't there at the time. Sort of wish I was, but I wasn't even alive for part of that. But when you take somebody who's a musical genius like him, you take any of the best creators or producers, there is just that there's a profound difference when everything has a different sound than what sounds like somebody is there playing it. What transforms it to that higher level, which is what a lot of music of all worlds does right, is it sounds like the music you were meant to hear at that moment.
Interesting.
It moves in a way that you're thinking you're hearing it, even though you might have heard it before, you never have. And when it lands right, it transforms your sense of time and place.
Interesting.
And there are so many people I know who are technically, say, for my own work skill as a musician, I would say 99.9% of professional pianists, of which I am not, are better than me at technically playing.
Hmm.
Maybe all of them. But when I sit and I play a piano, the room stops because of how I can internalize the sound as if I want to hear it. And everywhere I've ever performed it with my own music or improvising, people pause in their sense of time
Mm.
because I developed one specific skill, which is how to translate emotion into time you want to spend hearing that emotion. It's the same in public speaking, it's the same in
Yeah.
music, it's the same in all of this. And everyone who does it great, and I'm nowhere near Brian Wilson in my skill set, when it's done right, you just know. But the person who's hearing it knows it's not right because playing it technically right
Mm.
is not playing it into the ether of the in between of how all the acoustics of the music are hitting each other, the
Yeah.
energy is shifting every moment that you come in together. It's not that it's perfect, it's that it sounds much more intentional. And that's what makes somebody who's a musical genius in this world end up with the right take, and everyone else think, why didn't they listen to my music?
I found over the past several years, and I think I was alive, during the 60s and 70s, and that formed my musical taste. I follow an individual online by the name of Rick Beato.
Okay.
Rick has, I don't know if you know him, he has got a PhD in music. He plays every instrument, and he runs a number of different things, does great interviews with people you can never get. But primarily, he runs this thing called What Makes This Song Great? And he deconstructs the songs, then he'll play part of it, and he can pull any part out of the song. And on some of the older stuff where you didn't have the ability to digitally transform anything, where like on Bohemian Rhapsody, where they're cutting the tape and editing in certain parts, he explains just not the technical challenge, but the inspiration you have to get there. And then you listen to it again, and it has completely different meaning when you start to understand the emotional commitment and the intentionality it took for Freddie Mercury and Brian May and all of these other gifted musicians to create something that was so much bigger than themselves. I am
Absolutely.
particularly drawn to your comment about intentionality. I think that really represents a large part of what can kind of take us. The reason I inquired before about what you see when you do this, and I think I'm on track, in thinking in terms of you have a certain process in your brain that is almost synesthetic. So synesthesia is when you can trigger one thing and something else completely happens.
Yes.
Have you noticed that?
I mean, I'm a very unique individual in the fact that I am a complete idiot in most things with a really great memory and creativity, who also somehow can do business. Like I'm left and right brained. It comes from having a artistic, absent-minded Harvard, Princeton trained father and a mother who, I mean, she got a master's degree. She's brilliant, but she was in charge of everything. And she was 4'11". And my dad was 6'1". And the combination gave me this ability to synthesize emotion into interaction and to weave words in a way that have people follow my thought process as if it's theirs. And it's the same thing in how I started, which wasn't in speaking, it was in my musicality. And, everything leads you to a moment you don't expect to have.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I didn't expect quitting piano to make me a composer. I didn't expect getting sick at that same formative time to make me realize I need to build a global network of super connectors, which is what the orchestrated connecting community I run is. And I didn't realize that the synthesis of this was the same goal I have as a composer, Gary, which is I try as best I can to write that melody that gives you a sense of peace and purpose. It's why I compose. I've written over 220 some works. Somebody loves something I've written and they listen every day because it gives them a sense that they were heard. And I do the same thing every day with figuring out who you should meet, who somebody else I know should meet, and create the same resonance. I merged the two after several decades of fighting it into what I now call this orchestrated world that I've built. But the orchestrating part of it is related to what you just said, which is those musicians, they put something together that was greater than themselves. That was what a community could be. In this case, it was a musical group into something greater. But I think the only way the world changes for the better is with these purposeful, intentional communities that we all can build and should build more of. And that's what I've dedicated my life to now while composing every year at least one piece.
So it would seem like the musical composition phase of your life, did you know at that time that you were on your way to something else?
I've never had a clue in most of my life. I was on my way to something else. I've tried to figure out where opportunity will take me with a lot of aspirations of what hasn't happened repeatedly. But you can either live a life of repeatedly wanting something that you regret you never got, or you can love the journey of getting there. And when I finally had those aha moments, not as a composer, but as a connector, I was 5 years into what I'd already built. I didn't realize I had built an accidental network of connectors.
How
I
did
didn't
you
know that
how
my
did you come aware of
network.
that? It was happening and you were doing it accidentally or at least unconsciously. How did you recognize that this was something?
Every day the phone would ring. That's when people actually still just called each other. We didn't do these Zoom things. Um, People would call me and ask me for introductions they couldn't make on their own. I just took this as normal. Like I live in New York, it's a hyper connected city. I was well connected purposely. I was running an arts foundation that had supported thousands of artists, and like my world was philanthropy, wealth, and creativity in the arts worlds. And people kept calling me, going, "Do you know anyone who knows any Olympians who are gymnasts?" And I go, "Yeah, Lisa." And then that person, who is a former Olympic gymnast, would know the person the next person needed to talk to. And I was dense. Like, I mean, everyone might think what somebody does when they're being interviewed sounds polished, but no, like
Right.
I was dense. I made thousands of mistakes. And then one day, my friend Jonathan calls me and he goes, "You're my first call. I got a question for you." I go, "Shoot, what is it?" He's like, "Friend of mine is investing deeply in cannabis and cryptocurrency." And this was a long time ago before those were big areas. I was like, "Oh, they got to talk to," and I named another friend. And that guy said, he's like, "Perfect. You always know the right person." And I was like, "Why are you asking me for an intro in cannabis and cryptocurrency? I run an arts foundation." And he goes, "You're a connector of connectors. You know the right people and everyone trusts you."
Right.
And I thought, oh, well, that's how everyone sees me. I don't see myself that way. I love throwing events. What happens if I throw an event and I bring 40 of my network? I hate how events work. Let me do it differently. I hate when they're not intentional. Let me set up a code, which is you have to be an action oriented, natural giver. I would leave my kid with. Now it's plural, but at the time I only had
Interesting.
my daughter, Eva. And let me do this thing everyone thinks is stupid with events, which is start with a small group, curated, and then expand to open networking. And let me tell everyone that unless they come and ask for what they need, they can't come.
Interesting.
And I held one event, and 40 people who are, and these were my first core 40, they are known. Some are famous. Some are, oh my God, their access is insane. They walk into a room and they go, "I don't know anyone. Who are all these people?" And I'd be like, "Well, so and so friend, like these are three friends. They're all next gen family offices." And that friend would go, but I run the largest next gen family office in the world. I'd go, yeah, so do they. Uh, this person's a Broadway producer. This person's a Broadway producer. What'd you do this? I did that. We didn't know each other.
Interesting.
And everyone was in an ecosystem. By dominating it, they were limiting themselves. So the theory of change was something I've been doing for 5 years. What if I just put those ecosystem builders in a room? They're all givers. They're all the integrity that I would leave my kid with them. But the only way to be there is don't just come to help people. Actually talk about what you need. Start with the trust that you could ask me for what you need. Go talk to that person you don't know, sitting on the couch, talking with somebody else. And in 5 minutes, let's see what can happen. 11 years later, the network is 2,600 people. It's in 189 cities. I operate physical events in 10 of them, along with virtual. And it keeps working because I solve the problem connectors have, which is they never had an ability to ask for what they need. They were always asked to help others. By that being the core of it, and the only way to stay in my group is to be active and help people, I had to complete the final part of that psychology, which was if all these connectors weren't connected to each other, and I wasn't feeling valued having built this group, I wasn't feeling valued having spent 5 years building this accidental connector network, because at that same time, I was trying to resurrect a charity I was running from losing all its money in the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. I was connecting to thousands of wealth holders who loved what I did and kept telling me no. So I said, okay, well, what do you want to give to? And I kept connecting them, and yet I still couldn't get myself out of that rut because I was constantly giving away a value without saying it was valuable. That was the relationship value. And once I had all these things right, which now has become my book and my methodology, I started saying to everyone, here's what I think's missing. Do you think this is missing? And they'd go, yes, you're saying what I'm saying, but you said it. I didn't see it. Now I see the problem I'm creating, and everything was meant to shed light on the fact I was too dense to see it. You might have been too dense to see it, even though you were excellent at doing it. Let's solve a larger problem together. And that's when this became this world of a symphony. That's why I called it orchestrating connection, because when you do it right, like what happens from the ripple effects is profound on this planet, but it only happens by building trust, each person at a time.
Let me go back a little bit.
Sure.
When you were playing, you said you couldn't note music. You could see it in your head. You could hear the notes. You could play by ear. Did you eventually start to write down the pieces and be able to read the music?
So in high school, I learned how to write 2 pieces of music down. Now I could read music. I wasn't just totally inept that way. But it's really hard to, now it's easy with AI, but it was really hard at that time to learn how to write by hand, to write the rhythms, to make everything I was playing as an emotionally evocative piece straight on a piece of paper. I learned in high school, I perfected it more in college, and then technology, a program that's now defunct called Finale came about, which I'm still a user of. So I maintain a computer just so I don't have the Mac OS update that kills Finale. Um, I can use other programs, but I haven't had the time to learn. But it went from memory to writing. And then I realized there's a process to be had, not just of playing what you've written, but rethinking it through every time you go from mind to pen or paper. And I developed a different process to compose that went from improvisation to much more intentional. And my main teacher, a guy named Kyle Gann, he's like, "You're doing this thing called non-parallel unison." I was like, "What's that?" Because again, I wasn't trained, I just played. And he's like, "Well, every instrument in all of your works, they each should have the melody." And I'd go, "Okay." And he's like, no one really does that." And I didn't know it wasn't what somebody didn't do. And so I was like, well, he's like, "So listen, I listened to your string quartet. If I hear the violin lines, or I hear the viola line or the cello line, I hear a different piece." And I go, "Great, that means everyone hears a different piece. Maybe they'll keep listening." And I've always done things a little bit against the grain while seeming to be in the norm, because I didn't understand there was a different or normal way to do it.
So let's go a little bit further in though. You were building this thing I would say quietly, and you weren't aware you were doing it intentionally. You had a recognition that there was something there in these 5 years as you were putting these networks together and getting increasing phone calls. To me, that almost feels like when you first started your musical journey, where you just kind of saw things that would come together. This feels right, that feels right, not recognizing that there was actually a structure in place that you eventually learned how to memorialize. And now all of a sudden, you're 5 years into this, you've got these networks, and I guess the question then becomes, am I the only one that sees this, or are other people seeing the same things? Maybe it needs to be pointed out. And the moment is, look, here's the journey I've been on. Here's the what I've orchestrated and written. Are you seeing this the same way I do? Almost aligned with, are you hearing this the same way I do? I'm fascinated by that. I mean, that
But
evolution, and then to make that jump, right brain, left brain, and figure out how to commercialize it.
so
Incredible.
you have it totally right, and I appreciate the way you're giving me insight into this. I haven't even really thought through. Um, Here's what I'd say back, right? I I hate most events. I hate walking in feeling like I'm in middle school and I'm not the popular kid. And like there's people standing at the bar, not in middle school, obviously,
Right.
who are like the alpha male or the cheerleader, and like they
Oh,
seem
yeah.
like they're the most important. And like most events to this day, they still work this way. And
Yeah.
I think they're all horrible. Like I am exhausted by going to a conference where I've handed 30 cards and handed out 60 cards and having two people follow up. And I hate the fact that my most popular way to connect is when I give up on the conference and I go to the bathroom and I talk to somebody after we both pee, and that becomes my most valuable connection. It's something I traveled across the country for. Like I'm exhausted by the fact people think that's what it needs to be. I sat with a person who's a billionaire at a conference in LA, and they loved what I did and they wanted to exchange info. And I said, if you'd like to actually connect with me, I'd be happy to. But I don't just give my contact information out to people who might want to get in touch with me. Would you like to have a follow up or not? And they looked at me, and this woman said, everyone always wants my info. And I said, what's the point unless I know how I can help you and you actually want to take the time to talk to me? Otherwise, we pass the time over lunch together. And she like shook her head because she'd never been denied as a billionaire giving somebody their contact information. And I was like, listen, we spent 20 minutes talking. What do you need help with? And she paused, and I go, you never get that question, do you? Another thing I thought of normal, right? I built this system of connecting connectors. How did I build it? Gary, like, I love your podcast. I love what you do. How can I help you expand your tech that you're building into the wealth management space? As
Yeah.
we've
And
already
we're
talked
definitely,
about.
I definitely want to have
How,
that conversation.
how can
Um,
I connect you to friends who are musicians who go and perform in Vail, and I can WhatsApp them and go, hey, my friend's coming to hear you. Can you meet him backstage? He
oh,
loves
that's
classical
fascinating.
music. So, but this is what I did intuitively. No one thanks you for the help you give. No one asks you for what you need. And 70% of the people you meet when you're curious to them don't care a lick about being curious back. I saw these as massive systematic problems and I called it out because I learned from being that shy kid at that middle school mixer to go, no, you're coming to my mixer and you're going to be in my world. And my world is rule driven. It's systematic. It shouldn't be this way. And I've kept saying to people for 11 years now, do you see this the way I've said it is? And everyone goes, yes. And I wish there were more of us. And I go, I have several thousand. There's not five of us. I think there are tens of thousands. I'm building the system so we who should be valued more stay valued because relationship value is the most important value on this planet. Everything we spend our time and money towards is towards a relationship. Every M&A transaction is somebody going, hey, you should buy this company. Every investment in a startup is, I'm in this or my friend's in this. You should take a look. Every politician gets a donor because somebody makes an intro to that donor for their campaign. There are no accidents around how we make relationships work, yet the people who do it never get the recognition they should. That's what I set out to change. It's what my whole world is now, is to make this valued. and to have ethical people be at the core of it.
I've interviewed a lot of business leaders, executive coaches, great public speakers, and all the rest. And it's always, I don't want to give this word a bad meaning, but it's always transactional. You're called in to speak to a group and you're going to leave them with a message. Half the people are thinking about something else. Another quarter is thinner at the phones. Maybe you connect with one or two people, but there's no follow-up. There's no ongoing, okay, what was my net benefit from this? Now, in any training I've ever given or taken, if there's no follow-up, it never works. Your follow-up is the point because the network becomes expansive, perpetual, grows in strength over time and capability. You've tapped into something I think that's at the root of a lot of people's fears.
Oh yeah.
How will
But
I be judged?
let me give you an example about how I was judged last Tuesday. So I show up at a family office conference where I'm not a family officer or wealth holder, but I'm a regular panelist and keynote. I love this conference called Prestel and Partners. And this guy shows up talking in the morning at breakfast. I can instantly see he's judging me because I'm clearly not a wealth holder. Not because I dressed poorly, just I'm not talking about the way he talks about it. And he was dismissive. And now I know I smiled because on the stage when the conference started, I was thanked by the founder and my panel on Hollywood was promoted. And, I had my friend Gary on the panel who did this little known movie called Pretty Woman. And I had my friend Zach on the panel, whose father, the late Robin Williams, was for me the most important comedian of every generation. And I had my friend Lamore, who brought Homeland and many other major Israeli shows to the US. That guy thought a little bit more of me. And then he Googled me because he had a moment. And he saw I ran a company for Ray Dalio. And I worked with Ray and his son Paul and Paul's wife Christina for several years building a film company. He came up as if he mattered, saying, I saw you work with Ray. I'd always love to talk to him about this thing that I'm doing. And I'm thinking, you've already judged me. You've already made me feel lesser than you. Why should I go to a notable billionaire I barely have access to on a good day unless I talk to his kids or I see him at a family event at a conference? Because we do still maintain a relationship I do with the family. Am I going to go to Ray and go, hey, this guy who was dismissive of me and sort of a jerk has something important to tell you? I'd like to use my one ask of the year to you to put him in front of you. And it's people don't understand because they think they matter more than other people. And this is where like we all live in fear of how we're going to be judged. The people who judge others believe they are superior, and those who are the most humble are the best givers. That's why my rule was, would I leave my kids with you?
Yeah.
Because it's no CEO title or net worth that can be attached to that.
That's really a great kind of rubric to consider. When I was developing my practice in wealth management, I learned pretty early on that if I wasn't really motivated to help the person I was talking to, it wasn't fair to that person to keep them as a client. So when I would go and talk to a prospective client, and I never cold called or did anything like that, it was all networking and referrals. I made it very clear from the outset that I am not here trying to sell you a bunch of stuff you don't need. This is a discussion to see if we want to mutually agree to work together. And I want to know about you. You're going to know about me. We may or may not move forward. And occasionally I would send clients that I had onboarded, that I'd taken a couple of years later. I would just tell them, look, you need to get help someplace else. Well, I have a lot of money. I know a lot of people have a lot of money, but I've got to be honest with you. We're just not connecting in the way that I had hoped. I know what you want to accomplish, but you question every recommendation I give you. I've got to resell you on the same concept 5 times, and we're just not a great fit. And I'm actually doing you a favor. Well, everybody wants my account. Well, you'll have no problem finding somebody else. And I'd let them
Yeah.
go. And then amazingly, within like a very short period of time, someone would come along and replace that spot in my book that wasn't just bigger, but they were better for me in all ways, where I
Mhm.
just all of a sudden had this mental space to connect. And one of the things I've always preached in my training is as an advisor, you can have the greatest week you've ever had. Everything goes great. You bring in people you love. Everything's going wonderfully. And then you get to a Friday afternoon and you get a call from someone that does not have a lot of money with you. You talk to infrequently, and they're calling to tell you they're transferring out because they think you really suck at what you do. And then I ask the advisor, what kind of weekend are you going to have? And they all say the same thing, horrible. Well, were you aware of that problem before it happened? Well, yeah. What did you do about it? More importantly, what was the impact that's going to have on the rest of the people you really care about? Because
Mhm.
we tend to carry those really negative emotional experiences. They're carried in the same part of our brain that PTSD lives.
Oh yeah.
They don't have time attached to them. They only have that emotional response. And it's like when you explain that to someone and the lights go on all of a sudden. It's like, you mean I have permission to only interact with people I care for and who care for me? And it's like, isn't that the point? Leave it
You
better
know,
than you found it?
I love what you say because so many people view a golden goose as an opportunity. Um, so many of you people view an interaction as something that's make or break, and they don't understand what long term really means because they don't understand the actual value of it. And like the thing I say always is, when I was in a place of abundance, it was very easy to help people. When I was not in a place of abundance, COVID, Dalio family lost a very important family member, one of Ray's sons, to a very horrible car accident. Within 6 months, we was transitioning out my work building this company because they weren't ready to run it. They were grieving. And like I was
Mm.
grieving for my friends and needed to find something new. And I kept taking calls with people offering to help them. And people would shake their heads and be like, don't you need to find a job? Don't you need to build something? I'd be like, yeah, but it doesn't mean I can't be attentive to what you need. And they would be shocked. And then I'd deliver that value. And one of them, my friend Rick, calls me up. He's like, you need to talk to Sherry. And I go, why? He's like, just call her. And I took a call with somebody who I didn't know as well. She became my first major client post leaving Dalio family office. I did great work with her for years, loved what she was doing. But it took a recommendation of somebody who I'd help without an expectation of return to do it. Everyone else wants to know what the numbers are. You're returning 11%. Somebody else, they heard their friend is returning 13.2. They're going to fire you. And then they fire you on that Friday. And then the next year, they're at 11. And another friend says they're at 15. But they don't realize is the person who was at 15 or 13.2 was at 8 the year before. Because all we're focusing is on that Instagram flashiness of what looks beautiful. No one actually talks about the fact that long term, their advisor had their back and stood with them because they're chasing the immediate as if the immediate matters more.
I hear you mentioned Madoff before. I had a couple of very smart PhDs in New York that had a lot of money with Madoff. They had a little bit of money with me. And I kept asking them, well, how is this happening? They said, well, it's secret. Well, if you work in finance, there's not a lot of secrets. So they finally came back. I said, here's the set of questions you need to ask them. They came back and they gave me the strategy he was doing, which from the outside might sound like it means something, but from a professional perspective, it was literally a word salad. It was gibberish. And I started to deconstruct it. And I said, look, I know you've been with this guy a long time. You got referred into it. I said, this is all bullshit. This is not a real transaction. This is It was a inside outside butterfly spread, put call bear combination nonsense. Early in my career, I made the mistake of getting heavily involved with options and the various things you could do with them. Nobody made any money. I made commissions, but no one made money, and it really forced me to reevaluate what I was doing. I'm not helping anybody. And management would say,
Yeah.
"Well, you're doing great. You're helping the firm. You're helping yourself." And I'm like, "I don't like this job." And I changed everything I did, and I started listening. So when I heard something like this, it was complete nonsense. I said, do you think I'm an idiot to these people? And they said, no, we think you're smart. Okay, you're smart in political science, you're smart in psychology. how would it be if all of a sudden I acted as if I knew what either of you were doing? There was silence. They moved the money 2 weeks later. Madoff went bankrupt six
Yeah.
months after that.
Which
So,
unfortunately meant they got clawed back for
yeah.
whatever they profited. But, you know, like when you look at human nature, you know, I mean, I live in New York City. It's a pedestrian city. Somebody takes one step off the curb when they see a car coming, they always run across the street and take, instead of taking one half a step back.
Mm-hmm.
It's pervasive everywhere. We don't want to backtrack. We don't want to admit we're wrong.
No.
We will admit we learned something later on when we're back in a place of positivity, but we don't want to admit we made mistakes. We don't want to admit that we don't know what we're doing. Like this is why, like, I appreciate with your podcast, like I'm not trying to give you my polished version of here's what's in the book and let me quote this and when I met so and so. Like the real version of somebody is somebody who's curious and vulnerable and willing to say where they were or where they are. And every other version is somebody we're projecting onto people as if that's how we want people to do it onto us. And when I've built relationships with some of the most notable people on this planet, I wasn't born with it. I developed a skill to get to that point where I could have many of these people in my Rolodex. But it happened because I had these soft skills I wished people did to me and never do, which is I wanted somebody to be curious about my life and I wanted them to be vulnerable back to me when I say something like my father passed. And I use this as a litmus test. It's strategic. It's also important because I was approached by a guy the other week, wanted me to speak at his conference. And I said, I haven't been doing a lot of conferences this fall. Like my dad passed away. And his response was, well, when you're ready to speak again, let me know. Nothing about losing my dad. Guess where I'm not going to speak?
No, I couldn't agree more. Um, so a couple of things come to mind. When you say you weren't born with it, I would push back a little bit on that. Your EQ, obviously, and I don't look at EQ as emotional quotient. I look at it from an empathy standpoint because you can actually feel what someone else is feeling if they open up and allow that vulnerability to show. I think sometimes when you lose someone and they offer their sympathies, that's fine, but those are just words. Um, I lost my dad at a very early age. I was 24
I'm
years old.
sorry.
It was awful. I lost my best friend in 2008 in a plane crash that never should have happened. And when I went through and got through that, I worked with an attorney, an aviation attorney, that represented, it was a cousin of mine, represented the family, and we engineered a pretty strong settlement. Then when he started to tell me how he was referring most of his cases to an insurance guy who would sell them an annuity, which was guaranteed, but it was a guaranteed crappy investment for the people. I said, look, I said, I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand what these victims are going through because I've been in that seat. I can help them. And all of a sudden, I started getting introductions to the survivors of victims that had died in plane crashes that weren't their fault. And when I would meet them, I wouldn't say, I'm sorry for your loss. I would explain where I was coming from. And I'd say, I feel what you feel. I know what this is. And it's not going to get better right away. It's going to take time. But I want to help you because I know what you're feeling. Not, hey, I'm sorry for your loss. To me, those are just words.
Yeah, that's
But
a
if you suffer
Hallmark
the loss of a
response.
parent, yeah. So
Yeah.
it seems like you've built this network where the baseline emotion would be empathy.
100%. I I wasn't as good as this till my 20s, but I've always had it. I've always been a very sensitive person. It's what makes me a creative. What I meant to say was I wasn't born with these relationships.
Mm.
My dad might have gone to Princeton and Harvard, but he never told me he taught Siskel of Sisker and Ebert until like decades later. Like Emmitt Smith was in his class, as were many NFL players from being Florida Gators. I never met any of them. He never used it as a network to benefit me. And I had to learn the skill sets to be seen and heard in privileged places where I didn't think I belonged, except for I kept getting invited into those rooms because I did something no one else really did. My unique skill set was I heard people and they'd go, "You should talk to Tim." And they'd go, "Who's Tim?" And there'd be the exact intro they were always waiting on. And that's what I've honed and gotten better and better at. But it all goes back to this idea that so many people who have great advantages don't do a lot with them.
Yeah.
And so many people who could do so much more don't get the advantage because they don't know the right person. And if I can spend my life to strategically get out of the way, that's the grand theory. How do I build a system to get out of the way so the right people can, in a
Sure.
trusted way, meet each other? I'm 11 years into this thing now. Now there's a best-selling book. I'm doing keynotes about it. I'm launching a tech. I'm doing all these parts of the process to solve the problem that I needed to solve I had created, which was I saw the patterns. I named all the patterns, but I can't be at the center of it because I'm one person.
Yeah.
And my work is to orchestrate it because then it's the whole symphony playing for each person. It's not just me, that conductor waving his arms around and you going, "What does he do? I don't really get that. David, can you help me?" And I'm going, "I can try to explain what they do, but only the musicians know. And then therefore only the listeners know if the musicians are responding." There's this layered approach that needs a sophistication in how we look at relationships. And that's what I've dedicated my life to now.
So I'm particularly drawn to the fact that you identified a problem, didn't even know you were solving it, became aware of it, started to expand it, and then looked for your tech, which I think is the exact thing you're supposed to do. Steve Jobs in 1997, basically at the Apple Worldwide Development Conference, and Jobs was brilliant. There's just no two ways about it. Weird dude, but brilliant. His comment was, "We're going to build things that solve problems for the consumer, that solve problems for the end user, even if they know they don't have a problem yet." The
Yep.
tech I mentioned earlier that I'm building solves two enormous problems in wealth management. Getting the word out's a different story. You are using tech which is now available, and I'm certain AI is all over what you're doing, to be able to harvest large pieces of data, some of which just might be by inference. It's not going to come out and say, "Oh, this goes with that." It's going to be, okay, pattern here, pattern there, pattern here. I see the lines. How do we make that happen? AI was built for that kind of thing. So
It
talk,
was, but to augment people correctly with SOAR Connect, SOAR standing for
yeah,
strength of authentic relationships, you have to do the inverse of what big tech has made trillions off of. You have
absolutely.
to have every single user have their data be only their data, a combination of everyone they've ever connected with. And then you have to augment it by training LLMs and agentics and AI to make them more productive and more valuable and valued in their relationships. But every decision still has to be human. You cannot automate trust. And
No,
people seem to think right now you can. You can have a system work with you after you've built trust or help you understand how to build it better. But you can't walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, this is my LinkedIn first degree," and have it mean something. You
yeah,
can't go, "Hey, we've been Facebook friends for 12 years, want to see our slideshow." Everyone go, "I don't care who this person is." When I say, like, the person I'm talking to next after we do this podcast is like a brother to me, he's a former Marine, he's one of the first members of my network. Not everyone is his cup of tea, but for me, he's delivered for me in times of crisis where I didn't know I needed it. Don't you want to talk with that person now? Like, tech can get us back to story, but we have to build the story first for tech to augment it. That's the platform, the systems level tech that I'm launching this summer.
it's fascinating. I mean, we learn by allegory. We've learned by allegory since the beginning of time, sometimes using pictures on the sides of caves, one generation to the next. Wisdom is the accumulation of experience and reflection. So how do we optimize that in ways that are outside our small bubbles? David, I love what you're doing. I really
Thank
do. I
you.
think it's phenomenal. It's unique. When you look at it from the outside, I don't want to say it's obvious, but it should be. It really
I
should
wish it
be.
was.
Well, you're on the way to making it more obvious. Are you familiar with a fellow New Yorker, Jesse Itzler?
Barely, barely
Okay. So
interacted, but years ago.
he wrote a book, and he was commenting in the book. It was called Living with a Seal. It was an interesting
Hmm.
book. He's the husband of the woman that invented Spanx. Um,
Yep.
his whole approach was he liked collecting people. Even if there was nothing he could do for them or they could do for him, he just liked collecting people and learning about them, which was fascinating. And he'd tell people about him. And I think he got his start basically BSing the New York Knicks PR people to come up with a song that the Knicks they play when the Knicks ran out, and he'd never written a song in his life. And that's how he got started. So
I
there's
love
this
that.
musical connection back to it. Interesting book, but this concept of collecting and connecting people, I think, is one of the highest value things anybody can do. And it's a shame from a geopolitical standpoint, there's not more of that going on internationally, especially what we see now. I love what you're doing. I really do. How do people
Thank
find
you.
you? Tell me a little bit about the book and how
Yeah.
do people?
So I started years ago, which is why my email is my name. And I've rebuilt my main website to be davidhoman,
Okay.
HOMAN.com. So
Hmm.
there people can see the companies that I run, my community, my book, my startup, my advisory firm. They can listen to all of the podcasts, listen to my podcast that's relaunching in a couple weeks. Um, but more than that, they can find all the content that I put out to make this easy. It's not just you have to buy the book to listen or to read. I've been saying the same stuff for many years now. What's catching on is the theme of every conference is about community. Everyone's talking about how we need to build trust. They're wondering how to do it. And I'm going, um, I've done it for 11 years with some of the most notable people on this planet and some of the most unknown people who are equally valuable. Um, there's a way to do it. There's a lot of red flags for people who need to learn how to do this better, but there's a lot of people who are great at this that need opportunity. So I
Hmm.
put all this out there in my world of my friends called the Orchestrated Empire. And you can also see me play piano on my homepage of my
I would
website.
love that. I'm
You
going to
can
check it
go to
out.
Spotify or Amazon or iTunes and put in my name and listen to my music.
I'm going to
And,
do that.
and my whole world has been try to find something I've given to the world that helps somebody else be more purposeful or give them peace. If I can do that, I'm happy, even if I die and I'm never financially successful. I'll have what my dad wanted his life to be, which is this mantra, which is he meant well. That's what I try to do every single day.
Yeah, you and I think, were raised with very similar fathers. My dad was always leave it better than you found it, no matter the
Hmm.
impact on you. If you've got the ability and the opportunity, just help somebody. It'll come back. I'm looking at your connector archetype thing. I'm going to sign up for that and run those questions
Oh, please
almost
do.
immediately.
The connector test is meant to not just tell you what types of connector you are, but then when you get the PDF afterwards, to understand all the people who can prey upon you because you're
Yeah.
generous, which is really the point.
Well, in fairness, I'm going to run that through the algorithms that I have sitting in my app and see what it does with your stuff as it comes back. Fascinating stuff. Our guest today has been David Homan. David, I could talk to you all day. It's just amazing what you're doing. It's rare that we see ideas that are completely unique, that absolutely can refresh you from the standpoint of hearing a wonderful song. But I think what you're doing correlates to hearing that song and knowing you're meant to hear it at the time. And that's how I feel about today's conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Gary. Thank you for having me.
Take good care.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.